Welcome to Ravenwood Acres. My name's Jake, and today we're going to talk a little tough subject. I might get a little passionate, so please bear with me. I'm going to do a little backstory on myself just to give you some context of why I tend to get a little passionate about this subject, and also just what. In the conclusion, though, I'm gonna talk about some of my recommendations for you to have an impact on your local community to improve your community's ability to respond and primarily respond and recover from a disaster. You know, the mitigation process is, you can have an impact on that too, but we're going to talk that part mainly, the end part. So, backstory on me: recently retired from the U.S. Army at the end of 2023. I have an aviation background, not a pilot, the operations and maintenance side. I'm an amateur radio operator that serves in my local community when I'm in the U.S. I'm currently in Europe working, but in Washington State, I'm a part of a amateur radio emergency services team, or ARES as they're known, which is tied to my local city. And we're very well resourced, and we'll talk some of that towards the end here. But why is it that important? And then after the 2005 debacle with Hurricane Katrina, when I was stationed at Fort Hood, part of my unit, an aviation task force, was put together and deployed in support of that recovery operations and rescue operations, quite honestly. And I got a lot. I didn't go because my son was due to be born. So my leadership chose to let me stay there just in case my wife went into labor. They didn't want to have to try to get me back. Our unit, that task force, was put together 72 hours, was ready to go, like packed up, aircraft packed, vehicles packed for the convoy of military vehicles that were going to go before it made landfall, or 24 hours, sorry, before it made landfall. They weren't given orders to deploy until 72 hours afterwards. And when they got there, there was no leadership. There was no direction. Nobody knew what was going on. And a task force commander, who was my battalion commander at the time, did what a good battalion commander do and took charge and just came up with a plan. And eventually some orders from FEMA and other agencies started coming down about, hey, we want you to go do this, and we need to move people from here to here, and so on and so forth. But initially, there was no plan. So, yeah, I just say that because I didn't directly experience it, but people I worked closely with every day back then, came back and it told me these stories firsthand, that experienced these situations firsthand. And it deeply impacted me. And so therefore, later in my career, I decided to pursue an educational background in emergency management. That gives me a little more context or idea of how this system's supposed to work. And that's why we're going to be talking mainly is there's a system here that's the FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, like to call the whole community approach, right? Where each stakeholder, whether it's a local municipality, private entities, and so on and so forth, they call them a stakeholder for a reason, right? That stakeholder is someone that has a vested interest. You, as a private citizen, should have a vested interest, and that's where we're going to focus on, right? Because your local city or county, depending on the size, may have its own emergency management coordinator, usually maybe not a full department unless it's a larger area. They might have a couple people that are designated in that realm. But if it's very small, like some of these communities in North Carolina, it's probably an additional duty of like the police chief or one of his officers, or the fire chief or one of their other officers, is an additional duty to be their emergency management coordinator. How much training do they have? That could vary. How much experience they have? That could vary. Does the county or city even have an up-to-date emergency action plan? A lot of times they are forced to do that, depending on if they requested any sort of grants or something like that from the state or the federal government to buy equipment or stuff like that, to boats or things to help with like water rescue or those type of things, if they're asking for that kind of money, usually they have to update their plans to receive those money, receive those funds. It's very generalized, so um, bear with me here. But the so I say this because when your community needs resources, there's a method or there's a system in place to use the ICS 213RR. The RR stands for resource request. For example, if a community or a city was impacted by a disaster, but the county overall was not, it would typically go from the city to the county, and the county most likely, it depends on what the request was, could fulfill that requirement. But if it's a larger scale disaster, like you're seeing there in North Carolina, multiple counties, if a city sends up a request for pallets of water, that county probably can't fulfill it. For one, there's most of the roads are gone in a lot of these places. So they're going to need helicopters to get that water there. And most counties don't have their own helicopters that I know of. And so it's going to minimum go to the state for this. And then this larger scale disaster, because if FEMA's involved, a lot of times these resource requests are going to go all the way up to FEMA. So giving you a basic structure here, there's a lot more to this, but it'll make sense here in a minute. Bear with me. So imagine now that communication systems like cell phone and internet are out or intermittent, spotty. How is this request going to get up, or how can it get up? Well, that's where an Aries team could come in, and they could use a program called Winlink, and they could send this form, which is actually in Winlink. It's an email system that can be used using amateur radio. And if your state is set up correctly, they'll receive it at the state, and then they'll review it. And if they can fulfill the request, or if they have more questions or whatever, it'll go through. So pretty cool. And that's a reason why an Aries team can be a very valuable asset in a disaster if they're trained and they're resourced. Key point. So where am I going? We're going here is the fact that if you understand this system, at least even at the basic level, now you can go to your city council meetings or your county commissioners and say, hey, what are our plans? What if, maybe you're one of those counties in North Carolina that was almost impacted by this. You got strong winds and heavy rain, but you didn't get some of the devastating effects of this storm, of this hurricane. You probably are pretty heightened on this right now. And you might be thinking, well, what is our plan? Because there could be all the resources in the world that are standing by somewhere in a staging area. But if because of this system, if they're not, the requests are not getting to them because your local leadership is disorganized, doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't have plans, doesn't have a system in place to get the information out to them, it's going to take a lot longer for you to get those life-saving resources into your community. And that's where we're sitting right now. We're relying a lot on private citizens making Facebook posts or sending, messages over emergency services net over the local repeater, which is outstanding. But there is a whole system in here that is not being, I don't know. I'm not there on the ground, right? But I feel like what I'm seeing here, it seems like it's very slow. It's taken a while, and it's starting to take hold and more because the state or the federal government, the state's going to deploy National Guard, and they might get them in, it takes a little bit of call them up and get them moved, get their equipment moved in the right area. But now once they get those people moved, they're hopefully receiving some of these requests and they know where the assistance needs to go. If not, they're standing around twiddling their thumbs wondering, well, we know a lot of people because we see on social media, all these people need help, but a lot of times they can't send people off just based off a Facebook post. They have to have like an official process. And I understand the frustration there. And that's where you come in. That's you as a citizen comes in and explains how frustrated you are with this system, that our officials are more worried about liability. They're turning down help, because they're worried, hey, some guy just brought me some water and well, we don't know, this water could be bad. We can't give this water out, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. Oh, it's mind numbing. but they're more worried about liability than they are getting you the dang help that you need. Go to these meetings, sit down with your local officials and explain to them that this is unacceptable and then stuff needs to damn change. So hopefully you learned something here. I hope I motivated you at least a little bit to get involved. We're getting away from this in America, and we see the effects, and all we want to do is complain about it on social media. Get down there to your city council, get down there to your county commissioners, and tell them you want change. Thanks for watching.